Hello, and welcome to this episode of Felonious, a podcast where we discuss the realm of true crime. From chilling cold cases to the wild and wacky, we'll explore it all with a perfect blend of seriousness and humour. My name is Emma.
And I'm Nazia. To keep up to date with what's coming up, be sure to follow us on Instagram at felonious.pod and visit our website feloniouspod.com. We hope you enjoy this episode, so let's get to it. What do we have today?
This week's find is quite a brazen one.
Yeah, I saw this on social media. I don't have time to read the full articles. I get most of my news updates from memes now.
I think that's the most of the generation, most of the population. That's the word. Most of the population do that now.
Yeah, that's true. So what have we got today?
So today, this is a Guardian article, but apparently it's all over the internet anyway. But a man has been arrested on suspicion of stealing a Banksy street sign in London, and it was potentially worth up to £500,000 and was stolen an hour after it was confirmed as a genuine Banksy.
Now, this happened just before Christmas, didn't it?
Well, this article went up the day before Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
Banksy confirmed it, and then like an hour after that, like two men came along with a bolt cutter and took the sign down. And there's actually a video of them doing it. You could just see one guy handing this set of bolt cutters to another guy, and the main guy is just pulling the sign off and then just runs across to the other side of the street. And there's loads of people just watching. They haven't hidden their identities at all. They haven't put like masks on or anything. You can quite clearly see their faces.
It's pretty obvious that they're being filmed.
Yeah.
And if you're gonna steal a Banksy artwork nowadays, like people film anything and everything. Like, what? What did they think was gonna happen?
I don't know.
And also, like, particularly this piece of artwork or graffiti, whatever you want to call it, it's a political message given what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, like all of Banksy's work is quite political, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, by the time this episode airs, goodness knows what state the world's going to be in, given how things are escalating at the moment. But it's a political piece of work, and some idiot is just thinking pound signs.
Yeah.
And also, if you're going to steal it, how do you think you're going to make money from it? Who's going to want to buy a stolen Banksy street sign? What was going through their heads?
No idea.
Oh, dear. But they've been arrested, haven't they?
Yeah, it says one man was arrested on suspicion of theft and criminal damage. And at the time of this article, he was in custody.
Right. Oh, dear. People are really stupid.
Yeah, that's one word for it.
Yeah, that's putting it lightly. Where in London was that? Was that in Peckham?
Yeah, it was in Peckham.
So it's quite a busy area as well.
Yeah. So the sign was, making a political statement about the global arms trade.
Yeah, rightly so.
Yeah, and a calling for the ceasefire in Gaza.
Yeah. Anyway, shall we go on to today's episode?
Yeah, let's start today's episode.
Oh, gosh, this is going to rile me up. I have many feelings about today's case. So, in this episode, we will be discussing the serial conman, Robert Hendy-Freegard. While he is British and committed the majority of his crimes in the UK, his last encounter with law enforcement was in Belgium, and he is currently on trial in France for attempted murder. This man pretended to be Baines? I'm tired. This man pretended to be James Bond and fooled dozens of people into believing his extravagant lies. We hope he gets the goldfinger in jail, where he belongs.
Hope he gets a bit more than that.
Yeah. Let's hope he makes it to jail.
Yeah.
And stays there for a very, very, very long time. Because today's episode, as well as discussing fraud, will also be discussing slightly darker topics such as domestic and physical abuse, psychological abuse, and emotional abuse. There's also going to be mentions of suicide, mention of murder, and allusions to animal abuse. You might have already heard of this guy from the Netflix documentary called The Puppet Master. So we've got most of our information from there, but we've also got additional information from various news articles. And the Netflix documentary, what year does that finish? I think it ends in...
I think it's 2020, isn't it?
Yeah, 2020. It's like it came out during the pandemic, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we find out that he carried on being an arsehole after 2020. And yeah, so he's currently awaiting trial in France, and we'll tell you why at the end of this episode.
Robert Hendy-Freegard was born in Dronfield, which is northeast Derbyshire, on the 1st of March 1971. He lived with his mother and sister, and according to one article, Freegard had told the police, we're not sure when, that his father was dead, but in actual fact he was alive and was a nurse at Sheffield Hospital. Robert's father was kicked out when he was born. Robert and his father didn't meet until he was 16, and again when he was about to be arrested at age 32. According to another article we read, Robert's mother was emotionally unstable and moved around a lot while in and out of employment. His older sister moved out and became a nurse, and Robert was now the sole focus for his mother, and he would get called a mummy's boy at school. A forensic psychologist mentioned that his mother put expectations on him, which he didn't live up to, and so decided to invent stories and elaborate lies to present himself as the perfect son for his mother and to charm others. His primary school teacher, Rita Taylor, described him as quite odd and was aware of him staring with a fixed look, but he was a charming, good-looking boy and could play up to anybody. He left school at around 14 or 15 without any qualifications, but was able to do a City and Guilds course at Nottingham Uni in carpentry and joinery. At age 20, he met a school teacher called Alison Hopkins. She was 26 years old. He charmed her by his lies and said that he was very educated and that he was on his way to becoming very successful. He convinced her to lend him £1,500. The relationship lasted 9 months after she discovered he had broken into her home, stolen her credit cards, and raided her accounts. She notified the police, and Freegard was charged with 2 counts of theft. However, he didn't go to jail. He was also charged with incitement to kidnap. He had apparently tried to employ 2 people to abduct Alison, but the charges were not taken to court. He would follow Alison and camp outside her window, and so she decided to move to Newport in Shropshire to get away from Freegard, but he tracked her down. Then he met John Atkinson, Sarah Smith, and Maria Hendy. In 1992, according to newspaper reports, Robert started dating Maria Hendy around Christmas and was introduced to John Atkinson and Sarah Smith through her. However, the Netflix documentary says John met Robert in the pub that they used to go to and got to know him over the course of a few weeks, as he was working behind the bar as a barman.
Yeah.
John explains that this period was horrible because the Irish Republican Army had declared war. In the early 90s, the IRA bombed various locations in England intensely. The college John, Sarah and Maria went to had a large Irish population, so it was under surveillance for terrorists. A 20-year-old student had been caught by police there gun-running for the IRA. In January 1993, John also had an Irish friend who died by suicide by shooting himself. John told Robert about the friend who had died, and Robert suggested that the IRA shot him rather than it being a suicide. Robert suggested that the student who was found with guns and explosives wasn't working alone. He told John that he was an undercover MI5 agent who was investigating the presence of the IRA at their university. He said that because John's record was clean, they were going to use him to help find the cell. He then showed John how to punch as he needed to be trained, and then convinced John to be punched as he needed to be able to take a hit from any angle. John was then instructed to write down the number plates of cars parked near the fertilizer store, as it would be an ingredient used to make bombs. He also had to write a list of names of people he was suspicious of who had access to fertilizer. One of the names on that list was John's housemate, Jim. Robert told John that they suspected Jim was part of the IRA. Robert then said it was unsafe for John, Sarah and Maria to stay in the house with Jim, but the girls couldn't know the truth. To get them to leave the house, Robert convinced John to lie to them. He then persuaded John to tell Sarah and Maria that he, John, had terminal liver cancer and invited them to accompany the men on a farewell tour around England to fulfill his bucket list. On the car journeys, Robert would play Duran Duran non-stop, and he was telling people that he was related to the bass player in Duran Duran, John Taylor, but he wasn't at all. It was all a lie. 10 days into the trip, Robert told the group they couldn't go back to college because it was more serious. John admitted that he didn't have cancer after all. John then let the girls know that his story was a lie, that he didn't have cancer. Robert then let them in on his story. He convinced the girls he was part of MI5 as he knew how much money Sarah had in her account and how much wealth was tied to her family land. Robert told the group they had to keep moving because the IRA were following them. They had to be off-grid and could not contact their family or friends. Peter Smith, Sarah's father, began to worry when he hadn't heard from his daughter for a while. He contacted the college and was informed she was absent and they didn't know why. Her car had also been left at a farm she used to work at. Sarah eventually called her dad to say her and the group were visiting. Robert had instructed the group they needed to go there to reassure the MI5 that Sarah's father wouldn't talk to the wrong people and put their safety at risk. The group also had to stick to the original cover story of John having cancer and wanting to travel around the country. It was obvious to everyone that Peter didn't believe the story. The group left soon after. Sarah's parents waited several weeks and found out she still hadn't gone back to college, even though John had told them they would after 2 weeks. Peter paid for Sarah's credit cards, so he looked at all of her payments and tracked where she had been going with the group. He plotted out a map with the information and noted all the unusual expenditures. Sarah was spending more money than she usually would. One day he received a call from Sarah to say she was no longer interested in farming and needed to postpone her graduation. She had been offered a graduate traineeship at an insurance firm paying £25,000 a year. Peter called the insurance company himself and was told no such jobs were offered. Peter contacted the police, but as she was over the age of 18, they wouldn't do anything. He tried to look for her himself. Robert found out that Peter was trying to look for Sarah. Robert instructed Sarah to record the number of cars parked in certain places near where they were staying. Peter managed to track them down in Peterborough. He went to the house and found it to be completely empty, apart from Sarah and John's belongings. He also found a note with a script of the lie Sarah had told him about the insurance company job. The group went to a new house in Sheffield. Robert told them the house was bugged by MI5 for security reasons. Sarah had to change her appearance by cutting and dyeing her hair, and the group also had to use new names and were not allowed to make any attachments to any of the locals. John began working in a pub and Sarah worked in a fish and chip shop. They had a strict routine, which included driving around for hours for surveillance after their shifts. In 1994, Peter Smith continues his search for Sarah. Peter got in contact with John's parents. They said that John was on the run from the IRA and they had to pay money for his protection. Peter understood then that Robert was after money. Sarah had an inheritance of over £200,000. Robert told her the MI5 needed that money to be able to provide her with a new identity and new life. Sarah needed her passport, which was still at home. So Robert drove Sarah back to her family home while her parents were away. However, her dad had taken her passport out of the family safe and put it in a second one, which she didn't know about. Robert got angry and made John phone Peter. He was effing and blinding, saying that he was ruining everything. Peter warned him that Robert was a fraud. Peter then hired a private investigator to help him get more information to go to the police with and prove she was being controlled by Robert, but it was difficult to find her.
Good on Peter.
Yeah, Sarah's father is just like, why are you messing with him? He's you can't bullshit him, basically.
No, and I mean, obviously we don't know what he's like on a personal level, but from the documentary, he comes across quite likable, solely for the fact that he's so determined to find his daughter and he sees through all the bullshit quite quickly.
He doesn't want this man to take her money and he's not going to let him.
Yeah, rightly so.
Yeah.
So in 1995, Robert met Elizabeth Bartholomew, née Richardson, when she was 22 years old. She was working as a personal assistant and sales administrator at a car dealership in Sheffield. She had been married for just 6 months at the time. He was a regular customer, and according to the BBC, she would look after his children, and I'm assuming these are the children that he had with Maria Hendy, while he test drove top-of-the-range cars from the car dealership. He then started giving her expensive gifts and attention which she wasn't receiving at home, and they started to have an affair. That's when he started controlling her. He told her about his secret life as a spy and that she was in danger from IRA terrorists. She was forced to cut ties with her family and friends. He made her change her name by deed poll to Richardson, giving the reason that she was abused as a child. He then took explicit pictures of her, which he threatened to show her husband if she disobeyed him. Despite all of this, Elizabeth thought she loved him and was told that she would have to take loyalty tests by the MI5 in order for them to marry. She had to change her appearance, and at one point he made her go without having sanitary towels. Another time she was forced to sleep in Heathrow for nights at a time, and then she was forced to sleep on park benches during the winter. He gave her an allowance of £1 a week, which meant she could only eat a Mars bar and a slice of bread with that money. To have access to drinking water, she would visit pubs. He even took her jacket, so she was left to sleep outside in just her t-shirt and jeans. She ended up spending her days in libraries to keep warm. She became emaciated and she was covered in eczema, and her feet were covered in sores. Another humiliating test she was forced to endure was pretending to be a Jehovah's Witness and walking through London wearing an Indian sari with bangles and a bindi.
Why? Just because he could control her?
Yeah, I guess he just wanted to humiliate her, and I mean, she was very young at the time, and he must have got in her head so badly. I don't know. I can't even begin to imagine. But at one point, Robert told her that there were snipers around her home. So she was so frightened, she would crawl from room to room. So she would be like under the line of sight of the windows, and she was too scared to turn the lights on. He made her take out loans amounting to £14,000, which he pocketed, telling her it would help clear her debts. She lived in poverty for 17 months. She later, I think this was in court, she later described him as Jekyll and Hyde and said that he had totally ruined and broken her, which is completely understandable.
This wasn't in the Netflix documentary, was it?
No, it wasn't. I think the name is mentioned later on during a police investigation, but they don't go into the details of the relationship, so this was all from various news articles. In 1996, Robert met Leslie Gardiner, who was 28 at the time, in a nightclub in Newcastle. Robert told Leslie that he needed money to buy off IRA killers who had been released after the Good Friday Agreement. Over 6 years, she gave him £16,000, including selling her car for him. He also said he needed money to start a new life as a taxi driver and to help his sick mother. Robert then gifted her a Volkswagen Golf, which she didn't really want. 3 months later, she found out that it had been financed in her name and was in debt to the finance company. She felt no choice but to pay back the monthly payments of £260, while Robert still pocketed the commission from the sale. He's a busy man, having all these people under his control. In 1998, Robert separated John, Maria and Sarah, saying it was a decision from his MI5 bosses. They weren't allowed to contact each other, and in the Netflix documentary, Sarah says that he had full control of her life, including what she wore and what she did. All the money that she earned from her menial jobs went to him to pay for the so-called witness protection program. He made her open a bank account in Maria's name, which she had access to. And I guess that was I'm wondering partly if that was because he knew her father was still looking for her. So if there was no trace of bank transactions in her name.
Yeah, he wouldn't be able to find it.
Yeah. So at one point during his control over Sarah, he asked Sarah to wait for him at an airport, which she did for 3 weeks and had to scrounge around the airport for food. He told her she needed to get hold of her inheritance money as her wages weren't enough. Robert made her phone her parents again and again to ask for the money. Peter told Sarah to come home and to not trust Robert, but Robert made her keep calling. At some point, Peter told Sarah that the business was doing badly and staff were being made redundant. However, this didn't deter Robert. Meanwhile, Sarah's mother Jill was becoming ill with worry and the stress of the whole situation. She eventually succumbed to the constant phone calls and agreed to give the money, and then told Sarah to never call back. At the same time, Maria was being controlled, and she wasn't allowed to earn any money. She didn't have contact with John or Sarah. John went back to Derbyshire. All Robert cared about was what he was getting. He was able to use money to get fancy suits and fancy cars to grow into his MI5 persona. He decimated Sarah and John's savings, and he threatened to kill them or have them killed by other operatives if they didn't do what he said. John confessed the truth to his family and they convinced him to go home, but he was afraid of going to the police because of what Freegard had said about them being killed. In 2000, Robert met Renata Kister, a company director, in the car showroom and persuaded her to buy a brand new car. He kept £10,000 that he made from her old car. He told her his real job was being a spy. Over 3 years, he obtained £20,000 from her, which he claimed to put towards opening his own car dealership, and promised to pay her back, but never did because he hadn't been paid for his MI5 assignments. That same year, Robert met Caroline Cowper, a 34-year-old lawyer, at a car dealership in Chiswick when she traded in her £16,000 Mercedes for a £20,000 Volkswagen. He pocketed £8,000 from her trade-in money. When she discovered this, he promised to pay her back once he received his MI5 salary. He then borrowed another £1,500 from her. Instead of paying her back, he took the money off a desk he was selling her, for which he inflated the price by £1,700. He persuaded her to give him more money for a car to lease a business they were supposed to run together, but there was no car. He explained this by saying that it was being used by the Polish mafia. During this time, they began a relationship. They went on holidays together to places such as Brazil and Madeira. He then proposed to her with a £7,000 engagement ring. Her family intervened after they became engaged, and Robert gave her family Maria Hendy's father's contact details, apparently, so that he could vouch for Robert's character. However, as Maria's father had witnessed how his daughter was being treated, he didn't vouch for him. So I don't know what he was thinking at that point.
He must have just been believing his own lies.
Yeah, and he probably thought that he had the wool over so many people's eyes that he could just get away with anything. So she realised that their relationship was being financed with him accessing her savings account. When he refused to give the money back, she went to the police, but they didn't take her seriously at first, seeing her as a woman with vendetta syndrome. But eventually they did. Caroline went to the police and convinced them that he was a criminal, and she gave them a link to Maria Hendy, and then that led on to Sarah Smith. And Freegard was unaware at the time about any police investigations that were being conducted.
In 2001, Robert had maintained a relationship with Maria Hendy for 9 years. She gave birth to his 2 daughters, and she had given him all the money she had, while he lived his lavish lifestyle and continued conning other people, while she struggled to feed and clothe their children. Their daughters were sent to private school, while she wasn't allowed to work or have any money. He would also take her child benefit and spend it on what he wanted instead of the children. She was allowed to contact her parents, but he was always there and would always check the post she sent to them. When he left the home, which was often, he would lock her in and take the phone so she couldn't contact anyone. He would also accompany her to all of her medical appointments. He physically abused her, at one point punching her so hard he knocked her teeth out. At some point during the relationship, he changed his name by deed poll to Hendy-Freegard, although there are some reports that say that they married. After living as a recluse and realising his business trips to London were actually to cover up the affairs he was having, she found the courage to leave him and went back to her parents. In 2002, Bob Brandon, detective sergeant at Scotland Yard, received a call from Caroline Cooper to say that her ex-fiancé Robert Freegard had deceived £30,000 out of her. Detective Brandon called Robert and invited him to the station for an interview. However, Robert never turned up and disabled his SIM card. The police then went to the car dealership where Caroline met Robert. From his former colleague, they found out that he was a great salesman, but was dismissed for hitting on female clients too much. At one point, he told his colleague he was an MI5 agent. His colleague initially didn't believe him, but then he would join Robert on the drives to clandestine meetings without actually knowing what was going on. The police checked with MI5, who confirmed that Robert was not one of their operatives. He was added on the police national computer as wanted, and they started looking into his history. It was difficult to trace him as he changed his number and address frequently and didn't leave much of a trace behind. At this point, Sarah was put in a safe house in London. Robert would disappear for weeks, and she was told to pretend she wasn't home if anyone knocked at the house. Later on, Robert moved her to another safe house, but she wasn't allowed to know where it was, and he locked her in the bathroom, instructing her to keep quiet. She says in the Netflix documentary, if she could, she probably would have taken her own life at this point. One day, Robert turned up to the bathroom, after leaving her there for who knows how long, and asked her to be his girlfriend. She knew he just wanted sex, but she was so hungry and deprived of everything, she agreed with a glimmer of hope that she would have better treatment. Sarah's father, Peter, was not giving up his search for his daughter, even after 9 years. One day he received a letter from John. John had gone back to his family's farm and told them that they, Robert and John, were on the run from the IRA. His family paid money for Robert's protection. Over 3 or 4 years, he received over £400,000 from them. As John spent more time at the farm, he realised if he was being sought after, the IRA would have looked there. He realised he wasn't in danger of being killed. Robert stopped calling John, and John began to realise the whole facade. The realisation was a heavy burden on John, especially as Sarah was still under Robert's control, so he wrote a letter to her father. Peter then phoned the police and was put in contact with Bob Brandon, who said they would look for his daughter. The police found Robert's mother's house, and they also found a car registered 200 miles from his mother's house. They went to the address and were greeted by a man called Simon Proctor. Simon told them about Robert's ex-girlfriend Kimberly Adams. Kim Adams was an American child psychologist and was renting the house. She had also bought a car from Robert at the dealership he worked at. She told her colleagues she was terminally ill and disappeared. And this is according to an NBC article written in 2006. Kim came to the UK after her teenage son had moved out and moved in with his father. She was after new challenges and she accepted a job in the suburbs and so needed a car to get to work. When Kim and Robert first met, she thought that he had kind eyes and seemed very honest. The after-sales phone calls between the two became romantic and they then arranged to go out on a date. Bob Brandon contacted the FBI and spoke to Jacqueline Zappacosta and informed her about the case and Kimberly Adams. FBI agents went to Arizona to contact Kim's parents. They informed the agents that Kim and Robert were planning to get married, and he told them he was an MI5 agent. They were also told that Robert was planning to train Kim to be an agent as well. Robert had bought Kimberly expensive gifts like a Cartier ring, Rolex watch, and holidays. Kim's stepfather was a lottery winner who had won $22 million. They didn't know where Kimberly was, but had sporadic contact with her when she wanted money. And although Robert appeared to have a lavish lifestyle, he was very secretive and was hard to contact, even though he had 4 or 5 mobile phones at the time. But despite this, Kim fell for Robert more and more. And 6 months after their first date, Robert moved in with her. They then went to Marbella in Spain, where Robert proposed. He told Kim that he was offered a job in a lighthouse in Scotland to gather intelligence on Russian submarines passing by. Kim told her parents about the job and that Robert would be paid over £100,000 per year, but her father was sceptical. This is when Robert said that they would both need to go to spy school. The FBI informed her parents that Robert was not an MI5 agent. They recognised Kim as a kidnap victim and started to record the telephone conversations between Robert, Kim and her parents. Her parents left messages on Kimberly's phone until one day Robert answered the phone to her father. He explains to her father that Kim had failed an important training test for the MI5 twice and that it would cost £2,200 to resit, which they had to pay for within a few days. He claimed that he was paying the majority of the fees for Kim's training, which is £61,000. In his desperation, Robert puts Kim on the phone, who is clearly distressed, and her story becomes inconsistent as she speaks with her parents. The apparent background checks came back on Kim that Robert had ordered, and Robert told her that she needed to pay off her student loan debts as he couldn't be involved with anyone who had unsecured debt because it would put him at risk for bribery. So, because Robert didn't have the money to pay the debt, he told Kim to phone her father, who had just won the lottery, and she asked for £27,000 and they wired it to her. Scotland Yard and the FBI figured out that Robert and Kimberly were travelling around Europe, staying at each location for only 1 or 2 nights and using aliases. They organised a sting operation. Kimberly's mother convinced Robert to meet her at Heathrow Airport in person to hand over £10,000. Robert was very vague about whether Kimberly would be there, but they had to follow through with the operation. 2 teams were deployed at the airport, and a dozen officers were following Kimberly's mother's every move through the airport. Other plainclothes police officers were keeping an eye on the meeting point. Police saw a man behaving suspiciously in the arrivals hall and identified him as Freegard, but Kimberly was not with him. He met with her mother, but unexpectedly, Kimberly's mother excused herself to go to the toilet. There she called Bob Brandon in distress as Robert told her that Kim was waiting in a car in the car park. After some prompting from Bob, she rejoined Robert and they went to the car park. The surveillance team saw a woman waiting in a car and the police moved in and apprehended Robert. Just to add to how messed up Freegard actually is, and that he would go to any lengths to get what he wanted out of people, he told Kim Adams about his experiences as a spy in order to scare her. He told her that someone had discovered his identity and he killed the person by putting a nail gun to their head. He explained it as a kill or be killed situation. He scared her even more when he confronted her about her love life. Information passed him from his superiors. Kim confessed to Robert that she was involved with a man when they first started going out. Robert went berserk and phoned his associates, arranged for the man to be picked up and beaten to death. Robert told Kim that it was all her fault, but Kim still wanted to appease him. She was still in love with him, but she was also shit scared of what he could do. Robert didn't kill the man. It was all a lie. This was when the wedding was called off and that Kim withdrew from friends and family. Robert convinced her to leave her job and moved her to a rural cottage. Robert threatened to kill her on several occasions and even dug a grave to show her he was serious. What a fucking piece of work.
Yeah, exactly. So, after the police brought him in to the police station and he was searched, they found a piece of paper with a number on it under the name Ronnie, as well as a set of keys to a hotel room in the French Alps. Some of the calls had been traced to the French Alps by the FBI. They went to the hotel and found it full of designer shoes, watches, and a locked suitcase. In the suitcase, they found passports, letters, credit cards, driving licenses, all belonging to other women. They also found documentation going back to Renata Kister and figured she was the Ronnie, which had the phone number written on the piece of paper. Scotland Yard called Renata and asked if she knew Robert Freegard. After some persuasion, she agreed to go to the station. So I think all the women that he was dealing with, he made them paranoid about talking to the police. So they had to kind of convince her to talk to them about him. So she ended up telling the police everything and showed them a photo that she had taken of her cleaner, Carrie, which looked like it could have been Sarah Smith. So one day before the arrest, Robert called Renata and persuaded her to let a friend of his stay at her house. The woman, who he called Carrie, had no ID. Robert told her that Carrie was under witness protection after leaving her abusive husband. She was also Spanish and could speak no English. Another report says that he claimed she was South American and was a witness in a drug trial. But either way, he was faking who she was. Meanwhile, Carrie was told to pretend not to understand English for her safety, as she was still being hunted by the IRA. This meant the two women didn't communicate with each other for 3 months, even though they were living in the same house. The police wanted to speak to Carrie, so Renata called her, pretending that she was locked out of the house. When she opened the door, Bob just said to her, "Hello, Sarah." And Sarah, she didn't shut the door, she didn't run away or call Robert. She let the police officers in, and Bob filled her in on the whole web of lies. She was taken to the police station and shown the evidence to confirm all the information that Bob had overwhelmed her with, and she was then reunited with her family. Scotland Yard and the FBI had other victims on their list, such as Elizabeth Richardson, Leslie Gardner, and a Brazilian woman called Solange, who we don't know anything about. So in 2005, after an 8-month trial, Robert was convicted on the 23rd of June on 2 counts of kidnapping. 10 of theft, and 8 of deception. He was given a life sentence in December. During the trial, Robert and his defence tried to put the blame on John, and Maria Hendy and Kim Adams, they attended the trial as well. The judge said that if Freegard had a psychiatric report, he may have gotten a lighter sentence. Freegard initially refused this, but later he agreed. 4 weeks later, the defence didn't want the judge to see the psychiatric report. They were happier to go with the life sentence. In 2006, Freegard was apparently moved to a different prison because he tried to con other inmates out of money. There's no stopping this guy.
He's got no scruples, has he?
No, he really doesn't. In 2007, Robert appealed against the kidnapping charges. His lawyers argued that his victims were free to leave whenever they wanted. The Court of Appeal said that for there to be a kidnapping by fraud, there had to be unlawful imprisonment. As he had entrapped his victims psychologically and not physically, he was found not guilty of kidnapping. He had his convictions for kidnapping overturned and his life sentence. He was released in 2009, even though his sentence was reduced to 10 years. Freegard has gone on records saying, "If you tell a lie, make it a big one," proud of his actions and how deceitful he was. He could take people's money and control their lives. Sarah Smith started a career as a photographer, and John Atkinson, he's now working as a teacher. What I don't get, and we'll go into the laws, a little bit about the laws around this in the conclusions, but Sarah was physically imprisoned because she was locked in a bathroom.
Yeah, I don't understand how that was not taken as that. It was quite clearly he was locking people in rooms, and we see later in the next case that was the case as well.
Yeah, exactly. And Maria Hendy, she was locked in her house.
Yeah, and she was domestically abused.
Yeah, it's really, really frustrating. So in 2011, Robert started using the alias David Hendy and seduced Sandra Clifton on a dating website. In the Netflix documentary, her daughter, Sophie, described how all of her friends thought her mum was cool, and her son, Jake, described his mum as being kind and caring. Sandra and her ex-husband, Mark, began dating when they were 14 years old and married at 20. After their divorce, they remained friends and co-parented Sophie and Jake. Sandra started online dating. She started speaking with David in November 2011. He said that he worked in the media and sold advertising spaces to large companies. He flashed his wealth by buying Sandra a brand new Audi. David planned a holiday to Spain for the whole family. Sophie recalls the start of the holiday being normal, but then they spent a lot of time in the car with only David driving and playing Duran Duran non-stop. During passport control, he behaved strangely, not letting anyone see his passport or revealing his surname. Eventually, he spent more and more time in the Clifton home and would talk about his wealth. He would boast about his work and how busy he was, even though he rarely left their home. By 2012, Sandra had become more distant from her ex-husband, Mark, the more David was involved in her life. She stopped going out and seeing her friends, and she started to distance herself from her kids as well. On one occasion, Sandra accused Jake of stealing a bracelet David had bought her. On another occasion, David told Mark that Jake was gay. David started controlling their lives more and more, and at one point he and Sandra started locking Jake out of the house. David would tell Sandra not to open the door for him. Eventually, Jake had enough, and he left the house to live with his father. By 2013, Sophie had lost contact with her brother and dad. She felt abandoned and was only receiving guidance from David. David then started telling Sophie things about her father, eventually convincing her that she never wanted to see her dad again. Mark tried to contact Sophie many times. They didn't speak to each other for 2.5 years. Mark knew that David was tearing his family apart. He decided to look at David Hendy online, but couldn't find anything. David would drive Sophie to work and then back home again while she was working as an apprentice hairdresser. She had to pay £300 per month in rent when she was only earning just over £400 per month. David found out that Sophie had a savings account with £10,000 in it. He convinced her to lie to the bank to say she was buying a car. She took the money and gave it to David and never saw it again. One night, David didn't pick Sophie up from her workplace. At that point, she decided she needed to leave. She lived on her own for a year before getting in contact with her brother and dad again.
He did this to a number of people, didn't he? He arranged to meet with them and then just leave them in places, and sometimes he would tell people to wait in a certain place and it could be for like weeks.
Yeah, just some weird torture.
Yeah.
Manipulation tactic.
In 2014, David and Sandra left the house. When Mark was getting ready to sell the house, he saw the master bedroom had an industrial-sized padlock on the door. Newspapers had also been stuck to cover the entire window, and he also discovered a stack of overdue bills and court summons, including phone bills, parking fines, and mortgage payments. Even the £35,000 car which David had gifted Sandra had not been paid for and had been financed in her name. Before David, Sandra never had a credit card or an overdraft. Mark tried to do another internet search for David. He decided to search David Hendy, conman, and discovered articles and images on Robert Hendy-Freegard and realised he was a conman. He went to the police and told them his wife was with a serial conman, but they were not interested in pursuing the case. But Mark did not give up until the police began investigating Sandra as a missing person. In 2015, the police managed to locate Sandra and met with her. They told her who she was really with, and she told them that she knew. They offered her protective custody, but she said she wanted to stay with him. They couldn't do anything else. And when Sandra's parents passed away, she was absent from their funerals. Her father passed away wishing to see his daughter once again. In 2020, some of Sandra's friends were in contact with her daughter Sophie. There was one friend who had been contacted by Sandra, desperate for money. The friend refused to give the money and offered to pick her up from wherever she was. She responded by cutting all contact with him. Mark was continuing his efforts to find Sandra. A detective agency helped him and they tracked a mobile number, which the children had rare contact from, to a French network. Mark managed to find pictures of Robert with pedigree dogs. He also got in contact with someone who knew Sandra and was concerned for her. He met up with this woman who said she had advertised a litter of puppies on the internet, and Robert contacted her under the name David Clifton. He told the woman that her beagles were poor quality and offered his help. She went into business with him, but was not allowed to be in contact with the people he was dealing with. He transported dogs to and from France. She transferred money to Sandra Clifton's account for the business, but she only communicated with Sandra through text or email. The woman was running out of money and had no proof of what her money was being spent on. A friend contacted her and told her to Google Robert Freegard. She then went to the police, but she wasn't taken seriously. When she next spoke with Robert, he said Sandra had a high-ranking position in the police and would know what the woman had said to the police. After the death of Sandra's parents, she was to inherit a £300,000 house. Jack, her son, planned to put it in trust for him and his sister to keep it out of Robert's reach. Sandra took her son to court, and all of the hearings had to be done over video link because of the pandemic. Sandra was convinced that Jack was trying to steal from her, and the judge had to hand the inheritance over to Sandra. In August 2022, the French police visited Robert and Sandra's dog breeding facility in Vendée in France as part of a veterinary health inspection following complaints of disturbances in the village and concerns of the welfare of the dogs. It is believed that Robert and Sandra moved to France in 2015 and were illegally breeding the dogs. Robert was questioned by the police and they asked Sandra to accompany them to the nearest station. He drove into two officers in his Audi A3 and sped away. The officers suffered broken bones and facial injuries. On the 2nd of September 2022, after being on the run for 8 days, Robert was arrested near Brussels under a European arrest warrant. He was handed over to the French authorities on 17th of October and was indicted for the attempted murder of persons holding public authority. He faces life in prison. Screenwriter Michael Bronner said in an interview, "It seems he is pretty screwed. The fraud is complicated and hard to prove. His dog breeding business appears to be fraudulent, but that's a harder case to bring than attempted murder of a policeman, to which there were many witnesses." The mayor of the village of Vidaya believes there could be more victims of Robert living in isolation. While living with him before his arrest, Sandra spoke little French and had few interactions with locals. Whenever Sandra was approached, she would not interact and would call Robert. Some neighbours even recognised Robert from the Netflix documentary. Locals were worried about her isolated life, and at one point, the official in charge of women's rights tried to make contact with Sandra. She suggested that Sandra should be put in contact with an association for vulnerable women. Since his arrest, it has been reported that Sandra has been reunited with her family. And we found the other day a Facebook group discussing Robert, including posts and comments from his customers who bought dogs from him. And one of the FB users raised a good question about how they lived in France without residency, especially after Brexit. And the most recent post was a comment where another user says he is currently in prison awaiting trial and that the police can defer the case for another 2 years. According to this person, his charge carries a max prison sentence of 30 years, and in France they take into consideration previous convictions.
Bloody well hope so. There was also another comment which I didn't write here. There's a theory that when the gendarme, so the police, when they went to visit the breeding facility and they spoke to Sandra, someone speculates that she might have called Robert, and that's when he turned up in his car and decided to try and run over police officers. Like, I really hope he goes away for a very long time.
I hope so. I dread to think if, like, I hope he gets convicted, but I hope his appeal process is a bit harder in France. I don't know how it works there.
No, I don't either. And I hope it is true that Sandra has been reunited with her family, and I imagine that's got to be a really, really hard process for her to untangle the years of manipulation and isolation that she's gone through.
Yeah, and believing her family again.
Yeah.
He lied to her so much and he convinced her that her family were stealing stuff from her and wanted her money. And, you know, I just can't imagine what that's like, going back to people who love you and would do anything for you, but you don't believe that.
Yeah, and she hasn't seen her kids grow up.
Yeah.
Because they were teenagers and now they're young adults. So I can't even begin to imagine what that's like. She's missed out on crucial years of their life.
Yeah, and it's damaging for them as well.
Yeah. So I've written here, Robert is a classic example of someone who exercised coercive control over his victims, among other crimes. He isolated his victims from friends and family, deprived them of their basic needs, controlled aspects of their everyday lives, controlled their finances, as well as other behaviours. And in England, coercive control only became a criminal offence in 2015, which was the same year that police found Sandra and she told them that she wanted to stay with him. And in 2016, the chief executive of Women's Aid, Polly Neat, said, "The number of convictions is worryingly low, especially as we know that the vast majority of women experiencing domestic abuse are victims of coercive control. If we can increase the convictions for coercive control and recognise patterns of perpetrator behaviour, such as those revealed by the Femicide Census, it will have an enormous impact on the reduction of domestic abuse." Scotland and Ireland established similar laws in 2018. In France, psychological violence and emotional abuse are recognised as forms of domestic abuse, but there is no law specifically for coercive control. Some states in Australia have laws which address coercive control as a form of domestic violence, but the legal approach varies across jurisdictions. And in the United States, coercive control is not universally recognised. Various states have laws which address domestic violence, which may include aspects of coercive control. So earlier on when I was talking about the laws, so when he successfully appealed the kidnapping charges, it's a real shame. I think if coercive control was illegal back then, I think that could have helped keep him in jail a bit longer. Although I remember correctly, if someone is imprisoned for coercive control, I think the max sentence is 5 years.
But that would have been 5 years longer than he got.
Yeah, exactly.
His appeal wouldn't have been successful then either, I don't think. He probably would have had to serve... What did he... He got a life sentence, didn't he? Which got reduced.
Yeah. And then he got let out before that reduced period. So, yeah, it's just amazing that he manipulated the number of women, and a handful of those, all at the same time. You know.
But it wasn't just women, he did it to men as well.
Yeah, but I mean, mainly women, but obviously like people like John Atkinson. But, you know, once he got what he wanted out of the men, he didn't need them, he let them go. But the women he just held on to and decided to abuse them in so many ways. It's just crazy.
You know, Sarah Smith, I just can't imagine like 10 years of following this guy and like relying on this person who's just abusing you. It's just...
Yeah, that's how abusers work though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like they put so much fear into their victims that leaving the situation is more scary than staying in it.
Yeah.
And he amazingly convinced these people of this lie that he was a secret agent and used that to his advantage. And I guess also for some of his victims, it's that aspect of shame. If they leave that situation, they feel guilty or they feel shame for having gotten themselves in that situation, even though it's not their fault. You know, it's just really, really horrible. He's just a horrible person. And I really, really hope he gets the sentence he deserves.
I do as well. And I think we should keep up to date with this one. I think we need to do like a update as, you know, on the trial and...
Yeah, definitely. And I'd like to think, I don't know if it's going to happen. Obviously, he's being tried in France for the crimes he's committed here. But I really hope Sandra presses charges against him from England for the abuse. Whether she does or not, I don't know. Maybe she's just happy. Hopefully she'll be happy to be out of it and back with her family and back home where she's loved and treated as she should be. But I'd love it if he could get tried for that as well, because that he isn't just someone who attempted murder. He's a con man and he abused many people over a very long time. And in the ideal world, he wouldn't get away with that.
Do you think technology was on his side when he started doing all of this? Because there was no, like, Google wasn't around and, like, you were relying on just news coverage when it came on the TV. So it was easier for him to make up lies and for people to believe them. Whereas now we can, like, look things up straight away.
Yeah, I think early on, yeah, maybe, like, media was a bit different. But obviously by the time he started dating Sandra, things had advanced and, like, her ex-husband did try to Google search him, but he was clever in that he used an alias. But it's also the fact that the Netflix documentary had come out, and Robert even knew this because I think at the end of the Netflix documentary, they have a text after the credits to say that Sandra had contacted them.
Yeah, they sent an email, I think. I think that's what it said.
Yeah, saying that she wasn't in a situation against her own will kind of thing. which he probably made her write, you know? So it's like he knows...
He probably wrote it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and people in the village recognised him from the documentary, so it's just the brazenness.
Yeah.
Like, he's probably thinking, there's even a documentary about me on one of the world's biggest streaming services, and I'm still a free man.
Yeah. But he did the same. There's a film that's based on him called Rogue Agent, and he got in contact with, I think it was the writer of that.
Yeah.
And I think the main actor in that as well. And I think he was like giving them tips about what happened and stuff like that.
It's just the narcissism.
Yeah. He's such a weirdo. And those poor dogs.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. And there's pictures of him at dog shows.
Yeah, at crafts. Yeah.
Yeah, those poor dogs. I mean, I disagree with dog breeding anyway. That's a whole other conversation. But, you know, it's funny seeing on the Facebook group people saying, I bought a dog from him last year. And then someone else asking, do you know what litter it came from?
Yeah, what the family line is.
Yeah. And it's like one of them saying, he might have used one of my male pups or something like that, male dogs or whatever. It's just, and I don't understand how, because in France, like, I guess, as the police said, that he was breeding them illegally, so he probably didn't have a permit. He obviously didn't have residency. He didn't have a visa to be in France, which you need after Brexit, especially if you don't have residency.
How was he living there without a visa? And
so if they did leave in 2015, that would have been fine, because that would have been before Brexit.
Yeah, they had freedom of movement.
Yeah, but then after Brexit, like, if you were living in France, you had to apply for your residency, and if you didn't apply for your residency, you would have had to have gotten a visa. So I don't know, maybe because they were in a rural village, it made it easier for them to fall under the radar. And he was using an alias, David Clifton, so he must have had fake ID.
Yeah.
Maybe. And if she was living an isolated life, no one questioned her. So he just got away with it. But then he did something as stupid as trying to run people over. It's like, in a way, it's like you've gotten this far and you've just fucked it all up by doing the most stupidest thing.
Yeah. If he hadn't done that, he probably would have got arrested, then charged for something, and only did a few years. But now he's looking at a life sentence. Another life sentence.
Yeah. But I mean, thank goodness it did happen, because it means hopefully this has put an end to
James
what he's been
Bond
doing for years. And and hopefully it means, like, Sandra is back home and safe, and hopefully she can get on with her life. Yeah, and I just hope all his victims get the justice that they deserve.
Yeah.
After all this.
And I hope the police investigate all of his victims, even the ones that we don't know about. And I hope there's no one that's come across him and is still, like, waiting to be found.
Yeah, like the mayor of the village said that he believes there's more women living in isolation. So I really hope they come out of that situation. But we'll see. We'll keep an eye out for any
definitely
updates.
do an update.
What are we doing next?
Our next episode.
I forgot to put it in this. Yeah.
Good question.
Is it L'Oreal?
Yeah.
Is it Lillian How do you say her name? Betancourt?
Betancourt, yeah.
Yeah, Lillian Betancourt. L'Oreal lady.
That L'Oreal woman.
Yeah. So that's going to be a lighter topic.
Yeah, about frauding an old woman.
Yeah, still about money. Yeah. But less abuse.
Yeah.
There's no domestic abuse. And there's no dogs being abused.
No, that's true.
All will be revealed.
Oh, do you know what we can finally say?
What?
Because we know what day our podcast comes out. We can finally say, see you next Tuesday.
Yeah, that's true. Never thought of that. See you next Tuesday, listeners. Oh, God, how mature of us. We're both very tired and easily amused when we're tired.
You got to laugh after episodes like this.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Anyway, hope you guys join us next time.
Yeah, follow us and like us on Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get yours.
Thank you for listening to the show. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find more information about the show on our website at feloniouspod.com or on our Instagram at felonious.pod.
Links to our show notes can be found in the episode description, as well as through our website and social media. You can visit our Contact Us page and tell us what you think about the show and if there are any cases you would like us to cover. We hope you join us for the next episode. Goodbye.
Bye!